Welcome to today's edition of the J&B podcast. Here we are on the 22nd of July. It's the week of the Hungarian Grand Prix. It's the final race on the calendar prior to the now traditional mid-season European summer break. There's plenty to get through on today's edition, not least Jules Bianchi, who yesterday was laid to rest. We had several drivers in attendance. It was naturally a sombre affair, but he was remembered as the man who really brought joy to the hearts of many. We'll be discussing that briefly, as well as the Hungarian Grand Prix preview. There's plenty to get into there. It's a circuit which Lewis Hamilton has graced very fondly throughout his career. 70 laps of a 4.3-kilometre circuit, but more on that later on. We've also got Valtteri Bottas and his link to Ferrari. Of course, last week there were these rumours that he has indeed signed a deal to replace Kimi Räikkönen from next season. We'll see whether this is credible or there's more to it. And we'll also be looking into Nostalgia Straight. Who could forget Nigel Mansell, 1992. It's the circuit which culminated his hard-fought World Championship. And there are many other things that have really taken place at this circuit throughout its 27-28-year history on the calendar, not least last season. Who could forget as well Daniel Ricciardo, his second victory, those dying laps, his lunge on the inside of Fernando Alonso to steal first place. But as I mentioned off the top, Jules Bianchi, yesterday he had his moment where he was laid to rest and he was remembered for all the things that he did in his sadly brief career. What do you have to say about this, Jawad? And I should, of course, welcome you again. Nice to have you in our company, Jawad. But yes, let's talk as well. I know you were very affected too by the sad events of Saturday morning when we learnt of his passing. And what did you make of the funeral yesterday?
Yeah, thank you. Good to be here again today. And yeah, very sad, of course. I think everyone in the motorsport world, Formula One world, is sad, deeply saddened by his loss. And yeah, so he was laid to rest yesterday in his hometown of Nice, and there were quite a few present F1 drivers who were in attendance. Lewis Hamilton, Nico Rosberg, Sebastian Vettel, Jenson Button was there, and indeed the Frenchman Romain Grosjean too. So it's a fitting tribute, to his family and close friends, most certainly. But it's good that we're going to get back into the racing this weekend, as you said, with the Hungarian Grand Prix, and hopefully, put on a good race in memory of the dearly departed.
Absolutely. If anything, this weekend just serves as that chance to cleanse the memories of these past few days and just move forward and honour in that respect Jules' memory with a really fine showing, the best foot forward from all the drivers, one that will make him proud. And to that end, it's the Hungarian Grand Prix, of course, this weekend. It's round 10 of 19 on this year's calendar, and 70 laps, as I mentioned off the top, 4.3-kilometre circuit. And this weekend we're going to be seeing an allocation on the tyre front of soft and medium rubber. And Lewis Hamilton, indeed, this is a circuit tailor-built to him, much as it has been as well to a degree for Kimi Räikkönen. And as we've seen in years gone by, Michael Schumacher was a previous master. So it's going to be testing times for Nico Rosberg if he wants to rein in Hamilton prior to this break. I don't know about you, Jawad, but I'm going to be very heavily fancying Lewis to add another trophy to his mantle. He's won already, I think he's at 4 or is it 3 races at this circuit?
Yeah, indeed. Lewis Hamilton, he's the only one who's matched Michael Schumacher's record of 4 victories at this circuit, which is the most by any driver at the Hungaroring. And we're going to talk a little bit about them later in our Nostalgia Straight segment, 2012 and 2013, the victories there. But yeah, the problem for Nico Rosberg is that the last 2 races, well, Silverstone, British Grand Prix, and now Hungary, when you include that, is that they're circuits that Hamilton has, the sort of mental advantage at. So what's left for Rosberg to take victory? Well, when we look back 12 months ago, Hamilton had problems during qualifying, which saw him start from the back of the grid, but it was a race that had changeable conditions, much like Silverstone, and that threw about a lot of drama, which meant Hamilton was able to come back into the play for the podium, whilst Rosberg's chances went begging. So 17 points is the difference at the moment between the two in the championship. But this will be a real test of Nico Rosberg. He's had 3 weeks to recover and recoup, if you like. But this will be the test going into the mid-season break, whether he can claw back some points, or is he going to concede more, points to Hamilton's lead.
Well, absolutely. Last year really was the catalyst turning point in the events which manifested following the break this time last year at Belgium, when we saw Nico Rosberg, his front end plate making contact with Lewis Hamilton's left rear, and we all know the fallout from that one. There was a lot to be said about it. So whether anything as dicey will happen, as we saw in the final laps at last year's race, where Lewis went really all out and wasn't a happy Nico Rosberg as a result of that.
Yeah, well, the team instructed Lewis to let Nico through because he was on an alternate strategy and ultimately was the faster man on track. But Lewis said in response sternly, "I'm not letting Nico through." So a bit of controversy there, and surely Nico's unhappiness was carried over to the next race. But going on with Hungary, again, it's a low-speed circuit, similar to that, I guess, in terms of minimal overtaking as Monaco. And with that minimal overtaking may come some attrition, heavy attrition, if you will. So what do you think? We're going to see a lot of aggression from the guys this weekend, especially in the midfield, or...?
I think it's natural, really. This kind of circuit really breeds that outcome. It's not always a bad thing. It means that we know we're not going to be in for some sort of a bore fest with the two Mercedes flying off into the distance, even if that is the ultimate outcome. To have that element of real unpredictability, as we did see last year, courtesy to a large extent of the inclement weather. But we did see, of course, was it Marcus Ericsson into the wall, Sergio Perez or Vettel had a huge moment on the front straight. And
yeah, he was able to, at least Vettel was able to recover himself. He had a full 360 before putting the foot back on the power, so...
Lucky escape indeed. And really, as it is this final event before the break, indeed to this awkward phase which we've elaborated on in previous editions, we had the absence of the German Grand Prix, which has meant this will be our first event since Britain 3 weeks ago, and then as soon as this weekend's done and dusted, it'll be another 4-week convalescence until Belgium. So I don't know whether this will leave the drivers a little bit rusty, perhaps, or just feeling like this kind of race is a bit of an interlude between what you could describe as a bit of a extended holiday time, or whether they'll just want to really make sure that they leave the first portion of this season on the best possible note.
Yeah, there'll be a fine line between teams wanting to go into damage limitation mode before that 4-week interlude, as you said, or if they want to extract the maximum as possible. And certainly at this low-speed circuit, teams like Red Bull, I think, should be aiming to get good results. We've had Williams come out and say on their own admission that it's going to be difficult for them. We saw what happened to them in Monaco when both cars failed to finish in the points, and their car doesn't seem to be suited to those sort of circuits. And we all saw what happened in Silverstone too, where arguably the podium and even a race win went begging, so they lost points there in their battle with Ferrari. But if they've got a tough weekend ahead for them this time, Ferrari may be out of their reach.
And we're going to describe a lot more in detail on Sunday evening prior to the race. We'll analyse the qualifying results and look ahead to the race when we will have been able to have gleaned a lot more from the Friday and Saturday running.
Yeah, exactly. But at the moment, we can talk certainly about we can expect some attrition definitely, and a question mark that I put on my written preview, if you like, is could there be some unlikely points that get handed out as a result, especially to perhaps a Sauber or a McLaren. Now, McLaren in recent weeks have come out and said that they have been victim of some unlucky races in the past two events, not because of reliability, but because of accidents. We saw what happened at Silverstone with Jenson Button having been concertinaed by his teammate, and indeed the two Lotus cars into turn 3, I recall, and then also Fernando Alonso, who almost had his head taken off by the Ferrari of Kimi Räikkönen in Austria. So McLaren reckon if they can avoid those kind of incidents, first lap incidents with other people, they should be able to, show some good race pace and perhaps get a sneaky point, as Fernando Alonso did at the British Grand Prix. But on the topic of McLaren too, as you know, the World Motorsport Council decided to award them a 5th power unit for the season for Honda, and that means that the next power unit that they do take on will be of no penalty. So there'll be no penalty for Honda for the next power unit they decide to use, and that's good for them. Means no penalties for them. And I don't think we've discussed this, Baden, but also from that World Motorsport Council meeting from Mexico a couple of weeks ago, the new penalty system regarding engine penalties. So if they get grid penalties now for changing power unit components or going beyond their allocation, they'll only serve the penalties as grid penalties. They won't be carried over into the race as time penalties, or will be carried over to the next race. So it'll be done and over with, regardless of however many places are left over. So I guess that's good then for guys who don't want to be hampered by penalties all the time.
Amen to that. Really just simplifying things. It's really a bit of a headache for all parties concerned in that respect. When you've got to think, one sanction applies to this crew and then another does to another one, depending on the nuance of their situation. It just means that you can go into the race just aware that the grid will essentially race off as they form on the grid.
Exactly, and Mana Mauritius' Will Stevens also had a similar sentiment when he said their races at the back of the grid are compromised by having quicker guys such as in the McLarens or even the Red Bulls having to start at the back of the grid due to penalties. They want to be able to run their race rather than having to fight off faster cars or indeed be hampered, their pace being hampered by the faster cars trying to get through. So I think everyone will be...
McLaren aren't exactly that far up. It's not as though they would be P6 or 7 without the sanctions, maybe 15 or 16. But
I mean, you have to say...
It's still very much in that bottom reach.
Well, at least, they're faster than the the 2014 spec Mana Mauritius, at least. You can safely say that, but as far as other cars are concerned, indeed. But given the 3-week break now we've had since Silverstone, perhaps there is some performance to be gained by McLaren coming into the race, into this race, and certainly before Belgium as well, when they'll have a further 4 weeks to compartmentalise their car. But anyway, we should move it on now, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the Valtteri Bottas and Ferrari link. We saw last week this report by the Italian newspaper, forgive my Italian pronunciation, Corriere dello Sport, which outlined a
bravo.
to release Valtteri essentially from his contract with the Grove Williams outfit. So Williams would receive this essentially for the services of Bottas at Ferrari.
Yeah, so Corriere dello Sport from Italy last week, they reported that a €12 million deal was struck between Ferrari and Williams to release Bottas from his option. This is something crucial you've got to remember. Williams do have an option on Valtteri Bottas for next year, and it has been widely speculated that Ferrari is going to, because they have to buy out that option indeed to earn his services. So €12 million was what was said, but Sky have come out and said that their sources described this as a mere speculation, and both parties have denied that any deal has been done just yet. So with the intensification of these links, you've got to say that Ferrari aren't. Do you think, Baden, that Ferrari's looking at anyone else at the moment and it's just Bottas that may end up getting the gig?
Well, I have read as well that Nico Hülkenberg hasn't been ruled out definitively at this point, and it has to be remembered as well, he is now the reigning Le Mans champion, and this notion as well, perhaps the stigma of there being multiple Germans in the Ferrari team if you were to join Sebastian Vettel might be the one thing which precludes Ferrari from taking up his services. But I wouldn't say until we've heard anything that we can say that Bottas is in fact the man. And also, of course, Daniel Ricciardo, who is it's kind of a bit quiet in recent weeks, really. He's alluded in the press that indeed he is officially contracted to Red Bull, but as we've seen with Bottas, if he can be released from this deal, then what's stopping Ricciardo, especially considering Red Bull's a perilous association with the sport, whether they do decide to scale back or pull out altogether?
Yeah, potentially, but the thing that would worry me about Ricciardo, looking at from Ferrari's point of view, is that if they had to buy out Ricciardo's deal with Red Bull at the moment, it would potentially cost even more for Ferrari. I think 12 million euro, as much as it is, might be the cheaper option for Ferrari in terms of buying out a contract, which, if that does end up being the state of play, 12 million euro would be quite good for Williams, who have the reputation of being a low budget team that does punch above its weight, certainly, and 12 million in the bag could be handy when it comes to potentially getting a high-profile replacement for Bottas if he is to move from the team this next year. Now, you mentioned to me before going on air that Felipe Massa's option with Williams has been taken, and he'll be sticking around.
Absolutely. Well, it was always pretty much common knowledge this season. He's had some compelling results, an extension of his resurrection from his first season at Williams. He's turned his fortunes around significantly from the dying stages of that Ferrari tenure where he was thoroughly outdriven by Fernando Alonso, and it's really not a surprise to anyone that we've now seen him renewed, and who knows, he could even go on beyond that if he does continue this upturn in form. And it's really come down now to who would partner the Brazilian in the event of Bottas' departure. We've heard, of course, his rather awkward namesake, Felipe Massa, get that right? There's a very not so subtle difference there, but Felipe Nasser, I say, from Sauber. He indeed was a previous test driver for the Grove squad, and we've also got this rather more romantic notion that Jenson Button, if he were to be terminated his services from McLaren in favour of Kevin Magnussen or Stoffel Vandoorne, he could return to Williams to bookend his career, essentially.
Indeed, and as I was saying before, that if Bottas were to go for 12 million to Ferrari, that 12 million euro in the bag for Williams could be handy in securing someone like Button. So watch this space, certainly. We're going to be discussing, as we've alluded to on previous podcasts, that we'll be discussing the silly season at length during the midterm break, and we'll be breaking down and looking at who's got contracts and who doesn't, who's off contract and such. But interestingly, from these reports that suggested that Bottas and Ferrari had already done a deal, they said that Kimi Raikkonen's option with Ferrari, which is indeed for next year, he's got an option there too, expires on the 31st of July. So that's a week from now, and before then, according to these reports, before then they're not allowed to do any deals with anyone else. So perhaps that's the magic date we got to put in our calendars to see after then if something happens. But otherwise, it does seem to be heavily in favour of Bottas at the moment, even though you've got good candidates such as Hülkenberg or Ricciardo waiting in the wings.
I'll put it to you now then, Jawad, who would you like to see and who do you believe will end up in that second Ferrari drive next season, just based on objectively considering it at the very moment?
Well, in terms of who will probably end up there, it most certainly will be Bottas, because any team that Bottas would go to, it would be a long-term prospect, still very young at the moment, and has a lot of potential ahead of him. And I think Ferrari want to glean after having, sort of drivers in their prime, a little bit older, 30 years of age drivers for the last few years. I think they need some young blood. They've got Sebastian Vettel there this year, of course, as you said, multiple world champion, and he's still under 30. So someone like Bottas to join would really make this a red revolution, if you will. Really make it come full circle. But then again, you want to see. I'd love to see someone like a Hulkenberg finally get the driver. He's been linked every time a seat at Ferrari goes vacant. He's always been linked, but the problem is, how long if Ferrari were to sign him, how long would it be for? Would it be for just 1 year or 2 years? Who knows? Whereas with Bottas, you've got that solidity in that he will be there for many years. And same with Ricciardo. Unfortunately, the Red Bull situation with Ricciardo's contract, that's probably the thing that perhaps will dash hopes for him to get a drive elsewhere at a front-running team. But yeah, it seems like Bottas is the man then.
Well, for me, I'd say I'd love to see Daniel Ricciardo at the wheel, but I firmly believe Bottas will be confirmed, as you say, after that magical date of July the 31st. Anyway, we'll discuss that, of course, more during this silly season podcast special, which will be dedicated to tabloid-style sensationalist headlines, just to
it'll be more like an auction. It'll be more like an auction, We'll be like,
it'll just be all sorts of things going on, the most fanciful thoughts you could ever imagine. So it's going to be a bit of a laugh, but there's nothing else really that we could discuss during that break, so we've got to get a little bit inventive. But anyway, we're going to move on now to the nostalgia straight. We're going to look back at the Hungarian Grand Prix through the years. Of course, last season, we all know with Daniel Ricciardo and possibly Fernando Alonso, it was his final opportunity. You would have to look at it and think that would be the last time he would have been able to snare a victory for Ferrari. And we also had Hamilton spun on that first lap, and yet he ended up on the podium. Do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, so the last opportunity indeed for Fernando Alonso to win a race with Ferrari. Of course, they went winless last year, so did Alonso. Doesn't look like he's going to win any races this year either in that McLaren, but Ferrari have indeed come out and won a race this year. But yeah, in those dying laps, it was I think I was live blogging as well for that on that occasion, and it was very intense in those last laps. That Ricciardo certainly had the pace, and Alonso just hanging on by probably millimeters of tread on his tyres to the end, but he was able to hold on for a podium for second place, much to the delight of his engineer Andrea Stella. Great win for Ricciardo as well to back up his efforts in Canada. And Mercedes, the two of them were fighting, as we said before. Hamilton was the slower of the pair. Rosberg was on a better strategy. The team wanted Hamilton to let Rosberg through to optimize his side of the strategy, but Hamilton wouldn't budge, and ultimately he ended up on the podium. And what reciprocated from that was Rosberg's argy-bargy Morse code, if you will, at the Belgian Grand Prix.
To borrow a line from Neil Prompton.
I've got it stuck in my head. What can I say? The great man has taught me this line. But anyway, yeah, last year definitely a classic. Can't stop watching it on repeat.
And of course, wind the clocks back just a year or two earlier, we had essentially 2012 and 2013 were Lotus versus the singular man in Lewis Hamilton affairs.
Exactly, they were two very, if you will, last year was all wet and wild. The previous two before that were very hot and humid, high temperatures in Hungary at that time of year. And who else in 2012? With McLaren, Lewis Hamilton was still there versus the two Lotus cars of Kimi Raikkonen and Roman Grosjean. The Lotus chassis over the years have been quite kind to their tyres, and in a race as hot and humid as Hungary, managing the tyres well is the key, and we saw them up there fighting for the win, which was great.
Which to that end, of course, their designer James Allison now is a Ferrari employee. So what are the chances, you reckon, then just briefly this weekend, if we do get the trademark stifling heat rather than last year's downpour, that we could see Ferrari emulate their Malaysia effort?
Yeah, certainly possible. Won't rule it out. You said we talked about Raikkonen's impeccable record at this circuit as well, and he had the 2 back-to-back podiums in 12 and 13 with Lotus as well. So a good result for Raikkonen would be what he would want, certainly. But
I think we all want a good result for Kimi, don't we? Especially if it's his last season. We'd like to see him go out with a flourish.
We would love to see. I mean, I think everyone is certainly a secret Kimi fan these days, and everyone would love to see him do well. If it is going to be his last season, then he has to go out with a victory somewhere. But going back to 2012, very close race between the Lotuses and Lewis Hamilton. Same thing happened in 2013, but what was more special there was it was Lewis Hamilton's first win with the Mercedes team, and now see where that's brought him.
Oh, absolutely. Really, that was probably the start point of his rejuvenation from his McLaren the latter years there, where things just didn't seem to be going his way. And in that back half, Mercedes really put the queue into the rack, which has now been shown to be the right call because they came out from the start of 2014 and they haven't looked back really. So that was nice for him to get that first victory on the board ahead of unparalleled domination of recent years.
We've got you back. Sorry, we lost you there for a little bit.
We're back online now?
Yeah, you're back live, so just go over what you were saying before, sorry.
Basically just elaborating, Hamilton for that first season, that he got that victory on the board before Mercedes did turn their attention to 2014 and beyond.
Exactly, and also it was more so a touch of class by the man himself, a circuit that he certainly does very well at, and even in a car that wasn't well known for its time management back in those days, he was still able to put on a masterclass and fight off those 2 Lotus cars. But going back a bit further than the 2000s now, what do you got for us, Clayton? Yeah, a couple of decades back, what have you got for us?
Nigel Mansell, the man, the enigma himself, the moustache, the eyebrows, and for those who have been lucky enough to view it, the infamous Canon photo. What was it? Photography machine? Printing machine. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, those raised eyebrows. But the man, more specifically, after years of hardship which he endured, not just on the circuit but also off, he just fought against all odds really, and it culminated in his 1992 Formula One title, which he sealed at the Hungarian Grand Prix when he finished second to Ayrton Senna. And we did see a very visibly emotional Nigel on the podium that afternoon.
Oh, I can't believe it, certainly. All these years of hardships have culminated in this victory that I've now achieved, and no one can take that away from me.
And he very much enjoyed his Bucky Burger and ale, as we like to think of back in the day.
Instead of the champagne on the podium, he just whips out a Buddy Burger and one of his ales.
Yes, it's Nigel, just for the benefit of those who have been tuning in. Jawad and I have a bit of a running banter regarding Nigel Mansell and his little hardships which he has endured, and the little oddities which he might indulge himself in, you could say. And we do hope to bring you these more publicly down the track. But anyway, back onto the topic. Nigel as well, 1989, he indeed enjoyed a sterling performance there to win that Grand Prix. And do you want to elaborate more on that?
Yeah, it was more described as a surprise victory, if you will, for the Ferrari team and Nigel Mansell, and a very popular victory as well for Nigel in that year, beating Ayrton Senna, and what more can we say? Nigel's had a good record at that circuit as well. It's certainly quite special to him.
Absolutely, really, of all the circuits he did grace, that was one which really obviously would hold those fond memories in light of what he did achieve there in 1992. But I think for now, anyway, that's about all that we can say about Hungary. We might come up with some more little recollections on Sunday prior to the race, unless there's anything you wish to add at this moment.
Yeah, not really a lot more, apart from the fact that Mansell, winning in 1989. He compared it to his victory at Silverstone 2 years earlier, and then also dedicated it to the great man Enzo Ferrari, who passed away in 1988, where indeed Gerhard Berger's famous victory at the Italian Grand Prix was in celebration of that, of the great man passing away. So.
All right, then I reckon that's about it for us this afternoon. We've covered a fair bit there, of course. So just to run over it again, we had the funeral for Jules Bianchi yesterday, and he was remembered fondly. And got this weekend the final event before the mid-season break. And yeah, Valtteri Bottas will allude to that a lot more in the break, which is very much imminent. And indeed,
unless we have some news in between, if a deal is done, then we'll be sure to report that immediately.
Absolutely. Well then, that's it from me, Jawad. How about you?
Yeah, I think that about wraps it up for today's edition. We'll be back on Sunday, of course, race weekend. It feels like it's been forever since we've gone racing. It's.
Yeah, well, 3 weeks, and then it'll be another 4 subsequent to this weekend. So it's going to be a real dry patch for Formula One. And obviously, as I did mention, we'll have to get quite creative when it comes to our weekly podcasts.
Exactly. There's always news to glean over anyway. So thank you very much for tuning in today, guys, and we'll see you Sunday.
Yeah, until then, bye.